It was a long transition. I started studying theosis. That was my initial foray into Orthodoxy. Actually, I discovered theosis in a rather unusual way in China by examining the ministry of Watchman Nee, who died in a communist prison camp in 1972. As a result of Nee and his proteges, I learned about theosis. I learned about the real presence of God. I learned about how we could experience not only truth, but life. And so at that point, I started studying Orthodoxy as the origin, as the historic faith. And the more I studied Orthodoxy, the more I grew in love with Eastern Christianity. In the West, there is a sense of snarling logicality. It's all about debating and defining and defending. In the East, so much is left in the realm of mystery. And I think within Orthodoxy as well, there are a couple of things that are really, really precious to me. One is that Orthodoxy is not transactional. It's not, I say a prayer and now I have a card that gets me out of hell and gets me into heaven, but rather it is being brought into the church life. And in the church life, you can be transformed through the graces that are presented within the spiritual gymnasium that is the church. First and foremost, you receive the real presence of Christ. In most of evangelicalism, the vast majority of it, although not all of it, in most of evangelicalism, the idea of the Eucharist is merely memorial or a remembrance. Obviously, in Orthodoxy, it is far more than that. It is experiencing the real presence of Christ by which we are transformed, which causes us to be, as Peter put it, partakers of the divine nature. It is the grace by which we can experience God. I'm writing a book about this right now, titled Truth Matters, Life Matters More. It's not just about the truth, although Christ is the truth, but it is about the way and the life which Christ also called himself. And so I'm experiencing the transactional nature of the church within Orthodoxy, and that has been very precious to me. Yes, it is true that when I was chrismated April 9th, 2017, so a little more than a year ago, the first headline I read was Hanegraaff abandons the Christian faith, or Hanegraaff walks away from the Christian faith. And I think my reaction to that is that people who make these kinds of statements are not familiar with Orthodoxy. In fact, one of the great problems within the Christian faith is that many people are not only biblically illiterate, but they're also historically illiterate. So when you speak about the fathers, or you speak about the Didache, or the original way in which the fathers and the early church worshiped, most people are simply unaware of that. They have no historical context. And so my job is not to criticize those that criticize me, but simply build a lighthouse in the midst of the gathering storm. Let people know what Orthodoxy really is. I think this is the big problem, and I mentioned this in my lecture today. There are two major problems that I encountered. One, the outside world, the world outside of Orthodoxy, does not understand Orthodoxy. They don't understand the historic Christian faith because they don't understand history in general. The second problem is the internal problem within Orthodoxy, and that is many people within Orthodoxy, called oftentimes cradle Orthodox, do not understand the treasure chest that they have inherited. So there's two things that need to happen. One is the education process for people in the West, and secondly, the education process and the equipping process for Christians within Orthodoxy so that they can become reproducing disciple makers. I'll tell you a quick story. It's an interesting story. I started experiencing Orthodoxy on my own, without my family. I had experienced Orthodoxy all over the world, in Moscow, in the Ukraine, in the West Bank, but there's always a language barrier. And as I was studying theosis, I started going to an Orthodox church, fairly close to where I live, St. Nectarius. And at that church, I started experiencing the transformational aspect of Orthodoxy. And so I went 1 week after another week after another week. And the fourth week, my family said, "We want to go with you." And I said, "No, just keep going back to our regular church. You don't want to go with me." And they said, "No, we want to go with you." And I said, "No, I don't think it'd be best for you to go with me." They said, "No, we want to go with you." And I finally said, "Look, you can go with me under one condition. I'll give you a little primer on what Orthodoxy is." And I went to the internet and I got a primer on Orthodoxy written by Frederica Matthews Green, who is a popular Orthodox writer in the West. And it gave a little bit of a perspective of what they were going to experience. So if you read that first, you can go with me. So they read that. And my wife and my kids came with me, and we had a very interesting experience. The first thing that happened was when we sat down, there was an elderly man. He was about in his early 80s, and later on we found out his name is Deacon Harry, and he and his wife Vasiliki became family friends, but he sat right in between us. He kind of pushed my wife and I aside and sat right in between us, and he started explaining everything that was going on in the liturgy. And he didn't know who I was, and he just saw us as newcomers, and he wanted to explain what was going on. That was a very, very transformational moment for my wife. My wife was absolutely smitten by Deacon Harry. She was so impressed by his kindness and his desire to get up out of his normal seat and come and sit in between us and explain what was going on. And at the end of the liturgy, we went to the fellowship hall, and I asked my wife what she thought. And you know, if you've been married as long as I have and have 12 children, you can almost hear what your wife is going to say before she says it. And I thought she was going to say, "Get me out of this place." I could hear those words in my ear, but instead, when I asked her, "How did you feel this was?" and she said, "I loved it." And I remember distinctly asking one of my kids, "What did you think?" And I remember one of my daughters, at that time she was 13, she went just like this. And so Orthodoxy has been a fantastic experience, not only for me, but also for my whole family. Now, not all of my children have been chrismated, but pretty much all of my children come with me on the Lord's Day and experience Orthodoxy, and they all love Orthodoxy, and many of them, I'm sure, will be chrismated in the future. Some of them are now. But again, I think this is wonderful. I think that they all have to come to Orthodoxy on their own terms, not because of who I am. Well, it's been a very humbling experience. You asked me, how my experience has been in the Greek Orthodox Church in America and how it's impacted other people. And first of all, my experience at St. Nectarius with Father Steve Dulber, Father John, two incredible deacons, one Deacon Paul, the other Deacon Steve. My experience there has been incredible. They have never really focused on my celebrity. They just wanted me to experience Christ. And I feel the difference in being in the Orthodox Church is that I'm just a brother there. I'm not someone who a lot of people know. I'm just a brother, and that has been very, very, very comforting to me. So as a result of being in the Orthodox Church and communicating publicly that I have been Orthodox, of course that became a message that went out even if I hadn't said anything. Many people have come into the Orthodox faith. I can say without any hyperbole that many people, I don't want to say an exact number, but I have the testimonies that have come in through our website, through Twitter, through Facebook, through various digital media platforms. The testimonies have been incredible. People feel that I don't go off half-cocked, meaning that when I do something advisedly. I spend time researching. I've, of course, been memorizing the Bible for most of my life, answering questions broadly in public forums for over 30 years. And so I think that the fact that I became Orthodox, that I was chrismated, gave people, as it were, the permission to experience Orthodoxy. And my prayer is that Orthodoxy will welcome the seekers in the same way that I was welcomed.